This is Dominissimo Voxlore, transmitting on secured Imperial channels, sanctified by rites older than the siege itself. In this broadcast, we walk the path of the Emperor's champion, Sigismund, first captain of the Imperial Fists, High Marshal of the Black Templars, and the blade that never broke. From the ashes of Terra slums to the golden halls of the Phalanx, from duels that shook legions to the firestorm of the Horus Heresy, from the black armour of the Emperor's champion to the first vow of the Eternal Crusade. This is the saga of the Imperium's greatest swordsman. Strike the seal of subscription, Crusader, or risk being found wanting when the final battle comes. Sharpen your faith, bind your blade, and prepare yourself for the life and death of humanity's most relentless warrior. The story of Sigismund begins not in the halls of citadels or the training cages of a legion, but in the ashes of Terra, on a world still broken, burning, and bleeding from centuries of war. Before he was a champion, before he carried a sword in the Emperor's name, Sigismund was simply a boy trying to survive in a world that had forgotten mercy. He was born during the final years of the Unification Wars, a time when humanity fought itself for the right to even exist. The Emperor had begun his conquest of old Earth, yet countless pockets of resistance from techno-barbarian kings and twisted human offshoots still clung to their domains. Entire cities collapsed under the thunder of gene-wrought armies. Others fell victim to starvation, scavengers, or the slow suffocation of despair. It was in the ruin of one such shattered city that Sigismund was found, an orphan like so many others, another half-starved child too stubborn to die. He grew up among the refugees gathered on the Ionis Plateau, a cold, wind-scoured plain where abandoned machinery jutted from the broken soil like rusted tombstones. In this camp, life was a daily struggle, and a child's lifespan was not measured in years, but in how fast they could run and how tightly they could grip whatever scraps they found. Violence was a language everyone understood, and it was there, amid mud, hunger and smoke, that the boy would one day become the Emperor's champion, learn the first and most brutal lesson: no one survives alone. For a time, he survived because someone else protected him, a girl named Thera. She was older, fiercer, and feared by the gangs that prowled the camps. Thera was everything the camp was not: brave, selfless, determined to shield those who had nothing. Armed with nothing but a length of metal pipe, she fought back against those who prey on the weak, and for reasons Sigismund never fully understood, she chose to defend him most of all. Her presence was a rare kind of light in a place where hope had long since guttered out. She taught him how to move quietly, how to watch for signs of danger, how to pick himself up when knocked down. She didn't speak of honour or duty or purpose. She simply acted, and through her actions the young Sigismund learned what courage looked like. But in the slums of Terra, nothing good lasted long. One night, the Corpse Kings, a brutal gang that ruled the ruins beyond the plateau, came for the camp. They descended like a pack of starving hounds, killing or taking whoever could not flee. Thera stood her ground, as she always had, but even she could not face them all. She died fighting, her metal bar slipped with blood and rust. Her death should have been the end of Sigismund. Alone, terrified, and cornered by the same gang that had killed the only person he had ever trusted, he was expected to break, to collapse like countless children before him. Instead, something inside him shattered, and then reformed into something unyielding. He crawled through the ruins until he found Thera's discarded weapon. He lifted it with shaking hands, kneeling as she once had, resting his brow against the warm metal. This was no ritual he'd been taught. It was instinct, grief made into a vow. And then, with the bar gripped tightly in small but determined fists, he confronted the Corpse Kings. The gang laughed at him at first. Then, they stopped laughing. What happened next would echo through his entire life. The moment in which Sigismund learned that resolve could be sharper than any blade and fury could make even a child victorious. He struck with fear, hatred, purpose, whatever remained of the broken boy replaced by something harder. By the time the sun rose over the camp, the Corpse Kings lay dead, and Sigismund stood alone in the middle of their shattered bodies, barely breathing, barely alive, but unbroken. This event, told and retold in the early years of the Imperial Fists, was no myth. It was the defining point in his childhood, proof that even before Gene Seed transformed him, Sigismund possessed a warrior's soul. Yet the victory brought him no triumph. He did not celebrate. He simply knelt again, touching his forehead to the blood-smeared metal bar as Thera once had. It was a gesture that would become a ritual throughout his life, a moment of focus, remembrance, and clarity before war. Long before he carried a sword and donned ceramite plate, that simple length of metal became his first weapon, first teacher, and first symbol of oath-bound purpose. When Imperial forces finally secured the region, recruiters found Sigismund among the survivors. Many children were candidates, fast, strong, ruthless, but something about him stood out. Perhaps it was the calm in his stare, or the grave maturity in his voice. Perhaps it was the way he watched the Astartes with the same unshakable stillness he had once faced the gangs with. Some records suggest that scouts from the Night Lord's Legion noted him first, intrigued by the controlled violence he displayed. But genetic testing determined his compatibility with another bloodline, the 7th Legion, the Sons of Rogel Dawn. And so he was taken from the ruins of Terra to the fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists. No one in the camp knew what become of him. No one wrote his name in any ledger. There were no monuments to mark his passing. The boy who had once fought with a rusted bar disappeared into the ranks of the Emperor's Chosen. But Sigismund would never forget where he came from. The lessons of the Ionos Plateau, pain, loss, endurance, and sacrifice, were carved into him deeper than any gene modification. And within that crucible of hardship, a promise took root, that he would never again stand helpless while others suffered, that he would be a shield to the vulnerable and a sword to the Emperor. This was the beginning of Sigismund. Not a hero, not yet. Just a boy forged too early by war, and destined to become one of the greatest warriors in the history of mankind. Sigismund did not enter the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes as a prodigy, a legend, or even a name of note. He entered as a number on a slate, a candidate pulled from the ashes of Terra and delivered into a process designed to break all but the strongest. The transformation from boy to space marine was not a rite of glory, it was a crucible, one that few survived. And it began the moment the doors of the Thunderhawk sealed behind him. The journey from the ruins of the Ionos Plateau to the fortress of the Imperial Fists could have not been more jarring. Sigismund, who had spent his entire life surrounded by starvation and violence, found himself among children who had known other forms of hardship, some from hive-gang warrens, others from irradiated wastelands, and some who had been sold or surrendered to Imperial tithe. None of them knew what awaited them. All of them felt fear. But Sigismund, already forged by the brutality of Terra, kept his expression still, his thoughts fixed, his instincts honed. This quiet discipline set him apart even before the trials began. Rumour among the recruits suggested that more than one legion had shown interest in him. The Night Lords in particular were set to scout vicious children with the potential for controlled brutality. Their chaplains watched the candidates closely, searching for sparks of ruthlessness. And in Sigismund, a child who had slain a gang with nothing but a metal bar, they certainly saw potential. But compatibility was not a matter of preference, it was genetic law. And Sigismund's genes matched the Sons of Rogel Dawn. So it was to the 7th Legion he was delivered, into the hard-edged halls of the Phalanx, the star-born fortress monastery whose shadow alone humbled most new initiates. One glimpse of its vast eternal decks made it clear. This was not merely a fortress, it was the fist of the Emperor, wrapped in adamantium. The first trial was simple: survive. The second, obey. The third, endure what came next. The apothecaries and surgeons of the Imperial Fist wasted no time. The recruits were assessed, dissected, corrected, and rebuilt. Organs were implanted, bones reinforced, muscles expanded. Sigismund learned quickly that strength was not granted, it was constructed. Every stitch, every incision, every sleepless night of agony was another step toward becoming something greater than human. The instructors of the 7th Legion were not cruel, but neither were they gentle. They taught through exhaustion and expectation, testing not only physical resilience but the ability to remain calm, focused, and loyal under pressure. Failure was not met with punishment, but with expulsion, permanent, unforgiving, and terminal. Sigismund did not fail. His first deployments came sooner than expected. A rebellion on the cold mining moons of the Damakos Belt had flared beyond the capacity of human levies. The Imperial Fist deployed a rapid strike force, veterans supported by a handful of promising neophytes, to restore order. It was on these harsh, ice-bound installations that Sigismund tasted true battle for the first time. He did not excel by theatrics. He did not carve a path of impossible kills. Instead, he demonstrated something more valuable to Dawn's Legion: reliability. When ordered to hold a corridor, he held it. When tasked with breaching a barricade, he did so with precise efficiency. When ambushed by insurgent shock troops wielding stolen las cutters, he shielded a wounded battle brother without hesitation, placing duty above survival instinct. The sergeants took note. So did the Templar Brethren who accompanied the force. Sigismund did not know they were watching. He only knew the oath he carried inside him demanded nothing less. Across several campaigns, compliance actions, urban purges, void ship boarding engagements, Sigismund's quiet legend began to form. He was never the loudest, never the strongest, not even the deadliest, but officers, veterans and masters all saw the same thing. He fought like a man who had already sworn a sacred vow, and he never broke. In battle he was disciplined, composed and tireless. In the barracks he was humble, serious and unshakably loyal. In training cages he demonstrated skill far beyond his experience level, not because he sought to stand out, but because he could not bear being anything less than prepared. Where other warriors trained to surpass their brothers, Sigismund trained to surpass himself. It was this relentless drive that caught the eye of the Templar Brethren. The Templars were the elite of the Imperial Fists, a warrior cadre within the Legion defined not by birth or station, but by unwavering devotion to the Emperor and absolute mastery of close combat. They were the shield's edge, the sword's point, the warriors who stood closest to Rogel Dawn himself. To many brothers, they were walking myth. To Sigismund, they were a horizon, distant, brilliant and terrifying. And then one day, he was summoned. The chamber into which he was led was quiet, lined with banners depicting long-dead heroes. Standing at its centre was the Master of Arms himself, Appius, a warrior whose name was spoken with a reverence bordering on fear. He began with questions. Why do you fight? What does loyalty mean to you? What is the Emperor to you? Sigismund did not offer flowery oaths or grand philosophies. He answered simply, truthfully. He fought to protect those who could not protect themselves. He believed duty mattered more than life. The Emperor was the guardian of mankind, and to serve him was not honour, but obligation. There was no trial by combat, no gauntlet of champions, no ceremonial duel. Just an oath taken in solemn ritual. From that moment forward, Sigismund wore the colours of the Templar Brethren. He fought beside warriors whose discipline was absolute, whose devotion to the Emperor was the backbone of the Legion, whose blades upheld the legacy Dawn valued above all else. He was not yet their leader. He had not yet earned their deference, but he had earned his place, and Sigismund would not waste it. For in the years that followed, he would sharpen himself, not for glory, but for the day when a far greater test awaited, one that would demand everything he was, everything he had learned, and everything he had sworn. Within the Imperial Fists, the Templar Brethren were more than an elite formation. They were a brotherhood of oath-bound warriors whose discipline bordered on spiritual devotion. They stood closest to Dawn in battle, shielded the Legion's greatest relics, and embodied the purest form of duty. To wear their colours was honour enough. To lead them required something far greater. And one day, the time came for a new first captain. The process was as simple as it was terrifying. A single aspirant would face every Templar in the unit, one by one, without rest, in ritualised combat. Victory did not rely on overpowering each opponent. It relied on endurance, resolve, technique, and clarity of purpose. It was a crucible designed not merely to test skill, but to strip away everything except what lay at a warrior's core. Sigismund volunteered, not because he thought himself worthy, not because he sought rank, but because something inside him burned. A quiet certainty that this was the path he had been walking since childhood, that his oath demanded more. When the day arrived, those aboard the phalanx gathered in reverent silence. Hundreds of Templars stood in orderly rows across the great sparring hall, their armour gleaming beneath the cold white light. Dawn himself watched from an upper gallery, arms folded, with a still expression like carved granite. Sigismund stepped into the circle. He looked neither nervous nor proud. His only movement was the slow, steady exhale of a man who was prepared his entire life for a single moment. The first Templar entered the ring. Their duel was swift, measured strikes, decisive counters, a disarm executed with surgical precision. Sigismund bowed. The second opponent stepped forward. Then the third. Then the fifth. Then the 10th. As the hours passed, the trial became a war of attrition. Each Templar brought a different style, some aggressive, some defensive, some deceptive. Sigismund adapted to each with the fluidity that bordered on instinct. He did not fight with brute strength, he fought with patience. By the 50th duel, sweat dripped from his brow. His strikes remained precise despite fatigue gnawing at his muscles. The onlookers watched in utter silence. Even the thrum of the phalanx's engines felt distant. By the 100th duel, his breath came heavy. Cracks had formed in his training armour. His hands shook between bouts. More than once, he was knocked to the ground, but each time he rose faster, more determined than before. By the 150th duel, endurance gave way to something deeper than physical will. Sigismund no longer fought to win. He fought because stopping was simply impossible. Because the oath he had carried all his life, the vow forged on a broken plateau in the ruins of Terra, propelled him forward with the force of destiny. Finally, after defeating his 199th opponent, Sigismund stood swaying, bleeding openly from a split across his ribs. His chest heaved with ragged breaths. The world blurred at the edges of his vision. But he held his stance, and he waited for the final challenger. And when the last Templar stepped forward, the hull rustled with a low murmur, not of excitement, but of awe. For the last challenger was not a man, it was a dreadnought, Appius. The same master who had accepted Sigismund into the Templars now faced him in a sarcophagus of a Contemptor-class engine of war. The massive machine stepped into the dueling circle, its footsteps cracking the stone beneath. This was not a duel Sigismund could win, but that was never the point. The point was to try. The dreadnought advanced. Sigismund raised his blade with trembling arms. Metal met ceramite in a shower of sparks. Each blow from Appius felt like being struck by a falling building. Each counter from Sigismund was an act of willpower so intense it bordered on madness. Twice he was flung across the hall. Twice he forced himself upright. Twice he charged again. On the third exchange, Appius struck him so hard that the blade flew from Sigismund's hands. He collapsed to the floor, vision swimming, lungs screaming for air. For a moment, all was silent. Then, from somewhere beyond the pain, Sigismund felt a memory stir. The soft weight of a metal bar in his hands, the promise he had made to a dying girl who had once shielded him. He rose, staggered, broken, unarmed. The dreadnought swung. Sigismund surged forward, catching the strike on his forearm guard, scrambling up the machine's plating, driving a shattered piece of debris into a vulnerable joint. Appius faltered. Sigismund seized the opening, retrieved his fallen blade, and with the last of his strength, plunged it into the same joint. Appius dropped to one knee. The hall fell silent. Sigismund remained standing long enough to see his master bow his great metal head in acknowledgement. Then everything went black. When Sigismund awoke, Rogul Dawn stood over him. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists did not smile. He rarely did. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of pride, respect, perhaps even fatherly admiration.
"You are first captain,"
Dawn said simply. He presented Sigismund with a master-crafted relic blade, Imperator Rex, a symbol, a mantle, a burden. Sigismund accepted it without a word, for he understood that this was not validation, it was responsibility, and he would bear it until the stars themselves burned out. Sigismund's rise to first captain marked a turning point not only for himself, but for the Imperial Fists as a whole. From the moment Rogul Dawn placed Imperator Rex in his hands, Sigismund was no longer simply a warrior shaped by hardship. He was an exemplar, a blade intended to cut a path for the 7th Legion across the stars. And in the Great Crusade, there was no shortage of war to be waged. The Imperium at this time was in the midst of its greatest expansion. Rogue human empires resisted annexation, Xenos dominions defied the Emperor's mandate, and ancient horrors stirred in the dark between the stars. In every theatre of war, the legions of Astartes marched as humanity's vanguard. Among them, the Imperial Fists fought with a precision and discipline that reflected their Primarch's character. Dorn trusted his sons to be enduring, unshakable, and meticulous in their duty. But Sigismund brought something different, an intensity that bordered on zeal, a fire that turned Dorn's perfect discipline into something more aggressive, more daring. Where other commanders built plans, Sigismund built momentum. Where others hesitated to preserve strength, Sigismund struck decisively to preserve purpose. And so, across the widening span of the galaxy, his legend began to take shape. The Great Crusade placed legions side by side, and nowhere did Sigismund learn more about the wider world of Astartes than when the Imperial Fists fought alongside the World Eaters. The 13th, 14th and 15th legions all left impressions on him, but none burrowed into his life quite like the 12th, whose brutality and raw aggression stood in stark contrast to the rigid discipline of Dorn's sons. It was aboard the Conqueror, flagship of the World Eaters, that Sigismund encountered Khârn. Their first meeting was not diplomatic, it was not ceremonial, it was a duel. Khârn was already infamous then, favoured son of Angron, master of chain axe and blade, and a figure whose presence dominated any hall he entered. Sigismund, for his part, was no longer an unknown warrior. First captain of the Imperial Fists, he carried a reputation as a swordsman without equal in the 7th Legion. 2 warriors, 2 weapons, 2 philosophies. What began as a friendly spar became a series of bouts held in the ship's gladiatorial cages. Again and again they crossed blades, learning each other's rhythms, testing each other's patience, pushing each other's limits. Sigismund's precision met Khârn's savagery, his calm met Khârn's blazing fury, and each found something in the other worth admiring. Khârn called him the Black Knight, half jest, half respect. For Sigismund's armour, even among the Fists, bore the darker tones of the Templar Brethren, and his demeanour rarely broke from stoic silence. Khârn fought for bloodshed, Sigismund for purpose, but in the crucible of combat they became something close to brothers. It was during these duels that Sigismund witnessed one of the World Eater's strangest traditions. Before each bout, Khârn wrapped chains around the grip of his weapons, fastening them to his wrists so they could not be disarmed. It was a habit born from the Legion's gladiatorial origins. Before one duel, Sigismund requested from Khârn a chain so that he may not lose his sword. Although Khârn was wary at first, he agreed and unwound a chain from his own wrist to give to Sigismund. From that day forward, he bound his own weapon by chain. What had begun as the trademark of a legion steeped in rage would, centuries later, become the defining symbol of a chapter forged in zeal. But that future was still far away. For now, Sigismund fought at Khârn's side as often as he fought against him. Together they carved through orc empires, toppled techno-warlords, and shattered renegade human kingdoms. In these battles, Sigismund refined more than raw skill. He learned to read the flow of violence, to anticipate the direction of an entire conflict, to see how a single duel could shape the outcome of a war. He learned that sometimes the quickest way to break an enemy army wasn't a siege or bombardment, it was to remove their champion. These lessons would mark him for the rest of his life. But the Great Crusade was not only camaraderie and honour, it revealed darkness too. The more the Imperial Fists fought alongside foreign legions, the more Sigismund encountered philosophies utterly alien to Dorn's teachings. None tested him more than the Night Lords. During the Sherrick campaign, the 7th and 8th Legion were thrust into an uneasy alliance. The Night Lords, masters of terror and psychological warfare, fought in ways Sigismund found abhorrent. Their justice was brutal, their methods savoured fear, their victories reeked of cruelty. Tensions rose, words sharpened, accusations were exchanged. It was Sevatar, Jago Sevatarian, first captain of the Night Lords, who finally confronted Sigismund. Sevatar was a figure as imposing as he was infamous, pale, sardonic, deadly with a blade, and utterly loyal to Conrad Curz's brutal philosophy. The two captains represented opposite extremes of Astartes' virtue, honour versus ruthlessness, faith versus fatalism, discipline versus sadistic talent. A duel was inevitable. Unlike the wild brawls with Khârn, this duel followed agreed upon terms. Blades only, no killing blows, first to yield would concede, a contest of pure technique. For a long time, the duel remained balanced. Sigismund's style, clean and methodical, pressed Sevatar hard. Each exchange favoured the Imperial Fist a little more, and then, with a sudden crack of ceramite, Sevatar broke the rules. He headbutted Sigismund, an illegal move under the agreed terms, and sent him sprawling. The duel ended in dishonour, and Sevatar, unbothered, merely declared the lesson learned.
There is no honour in war.
That phrase burrowed deep, not because Sigismund believed it, but because it came from a warrior who wielded skill without virtue, a mirror showing what he could become if he ever abandoned purpose for victory alone. That duel shaped him as surely as any battle. It became a dividing line in his mind. There were those who fought for the Imperium's future, and those who fought only for themselves. Sigismund knew which side he stood on. As the Great Crusade swept onward, Sigismund's name travelled with it. He became one of the most respected duelists of the legions, but also a commander whose clarity of purpose inspired those under him. Where Sigismund fought, the line held. Where he charged, the enemy broke. Where he stood, the Imperial Fists found their anchor. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the battles of the Crusade began shaping something inside him. Not pride, not ambition, conviction. A belief that war was not a duty alone, but a calling. He did not yet understand how that belief would define his destiny, but the galaxy would learn soon enough. The Great Crusade forged Sigismund into one of the Imperium's foremost warriors, but it was the gathering storm of betrayal that would define the man he was destined to become. As Horus fell to corruption and the galaxy shifted from conquest to catastrophe, Sigismund found himself standing at the crossroads of fate, torn between orders, loyalty, and a prophecy he did not want to believe. The seeds of that prophecy were planted long before Terra burned. When news of Istvan III reached the Imperial Fists, it carried the scent of something unthinkable: treachery among the Emperor's sons. The War Master, entrusted with the Imperium's greatest command, had begun to splinter the legions from within. Sigismund, ever diligent, felt the shift in the currents of duty before most others. Reports were inconsistent, communications delayed, orders contradicted by counter-orders. It was during these early tremors of the heresy that Sigismund's path crossed with Euphrates, the saint-to-be, the visionary whose awakening had already begun to ripple through the Imperium's ranks. She was not a warrior, but something in her presence struck Sigismund with a force he could neither explain nor fully ignore. She spoke to him with a strange certainty, as if she saw not the first captain of the Imperial Fists, but a man caught in the tide of destiny. Her words were not a command, not a warning, but a truth delivered with calm finality. That if you leave Terra, you will die alone and unremembered, but if you stayed, you will fulfill your purpose, and that his father will need him. Sigismund did not understand what she meant, but her words rooted themselves in him, thorn sharp and impossible to ignore. For the first time since childhood, something intruded upon his discipline: doubt. Rogel Dorn noticed. Dorn always noticed. To the 7th Primarch, Sigismund was more than first captain. He was example, paragon, the blade Dorn could thrust into the heart of any battle knowing it would not bend. Yet now Dorn saw hesitation where there had been absolute clarity. He questioned Sigismund directly, expecting answers. Sigismund gave none. Not out of defiance, but because the truth felt too fragile to speak aloud. The Imperial Fists were mobilising, preparing to launch the Retribution fleet and bring revenge against the traitor War Master. Sigismund was expected to lead a significant portion of that fleet. He would strike from the vanguard, as he always had, carving a path for Dorn's justice. But Keeler's vision gnawed at him. He felt it in his bones, an instinct older than the gene seed in his body, older even than the Legion itself. Terra needed him. Dorn needed him. Leaving now would be a mistake. When Sigismund approached his Primarch, he did so not as a captain reporting to a commander, but almost as a son seeking permission he already feared would be denied. He requested, quietly, respectfully, to remain on Terra rather than sail with the fleet. Dorn's reaction was immediate and furious. The Primarch of the 7th Legion valued duty above all. He saw Sigismund's request as an act of selfishness, an emotional weakness unbecoming of the Templar first captain. Dorn had weathered too much betrayal already. Horus, the War Master he once trusted, had shown what doubt and secrecy could become. To see even a shadow of that in Sigismund struck the Primarch at his core. He denied the request. Sigismund should have accepted that. Obedience came before all things in the Imperial Fists. But he did not. Not because he wanted to rebel, but because he believed he must. He tried again, this time with urgency, conviction, and the weight of prophecy behind him. Yet he could not bring himself to repeat Keeler's words. A warrior's fate shaped by visions? It was madness to Dorn's ears. To Dorn, Sigismund's insistence became defiance, and something broke. The disowning was not theatrical. It was not screamed or shouted. It was not accompanied by fists slammed against armour or swords drawn in anger. It was quiet. Quiet in a way that made it far more devastating. Dorn stripped Sigismund of the one title that mattered most. Not rank, not authority, but the spiritual mantle that bound them. Sigismund was no longer his son. No longer one of Dorn's chosen heirs in duty and honour. He remained first captain only because Dorn refused to demoralise the Legion by publicly demoting him. But in that moment, Sigismund felt the weight of loss more profoundly than any wound. He had lived his entire life seeking to serve. Now he served in shame. Yet fate is rarely linear, even when prophecy guides it. When the horrors of the Solar War became undeniable, when the traitor fleets darkened the void around Terra and the first shots were fired upon the Sol System's gate worlds, Dorn finally understood the necessity of Sigismund's presence. Not because of visions, not because of prophecy, because of what Sigismund represented. Steadfastness, conviction, a warrior who would stand even when the walls began to crumble, a weapon that did not break. And so Sigismund remained on Terra, not in triumph, but in purpose. The prophecy had not promised him glory, it had promised him choice. Stay and fulfill your destiny. Leave and be forgotten. Sigismund chose to remain, and in that choice, a transformation began brewing within him. He did not know then what the siege would demand. He could not foresee the horrors that awaited, the legions that would turn, the brothers he would have to kill, the primarchs who would bleed, the walls that would shake. But one truth crystallised within him. If Terra was to stand, warriors of absolute resolve would be required. And Sigismund vowed, silently and fiercely, that he would be one of them. Not because prophecy demanded it, but because the Emperor deserved nothing less. And because Dorn, even in his anger, remained the father he would die to defend. As the traitor armadas advanced, Sigismund stepped into the greatest crucible of his life. A crucible that would burn away doubt. A crucible that would transform him from first captain into the Emperor's champion. But that was still to come. For now, Sigismund stood upon the walls of the Imperial Palace, the weight of prophecy upon his shoulders, the sting of Dorn's disowning in his chest, and the fire of purpose rising within him like a dawn yet unbroken. The Siege of Terra was not a battle that arrived suddenly. It pressed upon the Imperium like a gathering tide, darkening the skies long before the first guns fired. Sigismund watched the slow approach of the War Master's armadas from the walls of the Imperial Palace, their silhouettes blotting out the stars one by one. Every inch of Terra seemed to hold its breath. Even the air tasted different, thick with the electric weight of destiny. The first captain of the Imperial Fists stood at the centre of the storm, burdened but unbowed. Though Dorn's disowning still echoed in the back of his thoughts, it did nothing to diminish his resolve. If anything, the shame hardened into something deeper, an unyielding determination to stand worthy in the eyes of the Emperor, of Dorn, and of the Imperium that depended on them both. But Terra did not need a captain. Terra needed a symbol. Rogel Dorn was not a Primarch prone to sentiment. His decisions were made with the precision of a master builder, every action measured, every variable considered. As he oversaw the reinforcement of the palace walls, the construction of fortifications, and the deployment of the 7th Legion's forces, he studied Sigismund in silence. He saw a warrior tempered by loss and prophecy, honed by countless campaigns, and driven by something deeper than duty alone. Sigismund did not seek glory or redemption. He simply sought to be placed where the fighting would be hardest. Dorn recognised that fire, and he understood what it could become. In the quiet of a war council chamber lit only by hololiths in the distant glow of burning cities, Dorn summoned Sigismund. No praise, no apology, no mention of the wound that lay between them. Only the blunt truth of necessity.
Terra will fall without heroes,
Dorn said.
but heroes alone will not save it. We need something greater, an idea made flesh.
He looked upon Sigismund not as a disgraced son, but as a figure forged for a purpose older than his rank.
You will be the Emperor's champion.
The title hung in the air like a blade. It was not ceremonial, it was absolute. Dawn's voice, though stern, carried a weight rarely heard even among demigods.
You will seek out the strongest of the traitor champions. You will break them. You will show the defenders of Terra that we do not yield, that the Emperor's will is unbreakable.
Sigismund knelt, not as a captain receiving orders, but as a warrior taking an oath. Something inside him steadied. For the first time since Keeler's prophecy, he felt alignment, purpose, clarity. This was why he remained. This is what the Emperor required. The transformation was immediate. Sigismund's armour, once the gold and red of the Imperial Fists, was repainted a stark, unornamented black. Not the glossy sheen of chaplain heraldry, but a matte void dark, absorbing light like a warrior carved from shadow and purpose. Only the Imperial Fist sigil remained on his shoulder, a reminder of the father who had cast him out and the legion he still served. The weapons he bore were not his own. He was given a great, master-crafted blade, heavy, elegant and deadly, known as the Black Sword, forged for a single purpose, to cut down the traitor champions of the War Master's armies. It was not a relic of past wars, it was a weapon for this war. His helm was unadorned, his oath was simple. He would not rest until the greatest foes of the Emperor lay broken at his feet. And so Sigismund walked the walls of Terra reborn, not the first captain, but the embodiment of the Emperor's wrath. The siege began in fire. Orbital bombardments lit the sky like a false dawn. Traitor dropships screamed through the atmosphere. Titans clashed in thunderous duels across the plains. Demons clawed their way into reality. The traitor legions poured onto Terra in numbers too vast to count. And wherever the fighting was fiercest, Sigismund walked into it without hesitation. He became a myth in real time, whispered about by guardsmen who saw a black armoured Astartes carved through traitor champions with terrifying calm. Fists, solar auxilia and custodians alike rallied when they saw him stride toward the enemy like a living omen. His presence steadied morale faster than banners, faster than speeches, faster than the clarion call of trumpets. Stories began to spread. The Emperor's champion does not fall. The Emperor's champion cannot be wounded. The Emperor's champion kills champions with a single blow. None of these were true, yet none of them were false, because Sigismund did what no other warrior could. He hunted down the strongest enemy leaders with surgical precision, cutting the heads from the traitor Hydra, forcing entire warbands to collapse in fear and confusion. He slew champions of the Iron Warriors, breaking their chain mace wielding sergeants in close combat. He cut down the corrupted swordsmen of the Emperor's children, refusing to be distracted by their illusions or seductions. He fought alongside the custodian guard in the catacombs beneath the palace, killing demons that shrieked in languages older than mankind. Every battle left him scarred, every duel pushed him to his limits, yet he never wavered. He fought not for survival, but for meaning. And yet, even as he marched through blood and fire, Sigismund felt the eyes of his Primarch on him. Dawn watched not as a father watches a son, but as a commander watches a weapon he himself forged. There was pride in Dawn's gaze, though he did not speak it aloud, and somewhere deep beneath that, something quieter, regret, perhaps, or the faint echo of a bond severed too soon. But the siege offered no time for reconciliation. Sigismund's path was not toward Dawn. His path was toward the enemy champions who dared tread upon Terra's soil, toward the traitors who would see the Emperor struck down, toward battles that would push him closer and closer to the edge of mortality. Sigismund no longer fought because he was captain of the Imperial Fists. He fought because he had become a living oath, an oath sealed in prophecy, an oath sealed in shame, an oath sealed in purpose. As the walls trembled and terror groaned beneath the heel of the War Master's assault, Sigismund carved his name into the siege not through proclamation, but through the bodies of those who challenged him. All across the palace, warriors whispered, "When the enemy's champion comes, send for Sigismund." And he came, every time. The Emperor's champion walked through fire. The Emperor's champion walked through death. And the Siege of Terra was far from over, for the greatest duels, those that would become legend, were still to come. The Siege of Terra did not unfold as a single battle, but as a series of storms, each one more violent, more desperate, and more devastating than the last. And in each storm, somewhere in the shifting lines, Between the shattered avenues and the blood-choked corridors of the Imperial Palace, Sigismund moved like a blade drawn from the Emperor's own hand. By now, every defender on Terra knew his silhouette. Black armour, black sword, a stride that never broke, never faltered, never rushed. He did not run towards danger. He walked towards it, as though even time bowed to his purpose. And with every duel he fought, the legend of the Emperor's champion grew. But legends are not born from easy victories. They are forged in the moments when death reaches out and the warrior reaches back. In the early days of the siege's second month, Terra trembled under the heaviest assault yet. The traitor legions hurled their elite onto the walls of the Lion's Gate, hoping to break the defenders in one brutal stroke. Titans clashed across the plains, gun platforms burned, the sky rained down debris from shattered void ships. Amid it all strode Khârn. But this was not the Khârn Sigismund had known, the brother in blood who had laughed through their sparring matches, who had offered him broken chains as a mark of respect, who had once fought not for bloodshed but for camaraderie. The man approaching the palace now was something else entirely. Khârn the betrayer. Driven beyond reason, by the nails, by Khorne's whispering hunger, by the carnage of the heresy, his armour dripped with gore, his eyes burned with murderous zeal. The chain axe in his fist screamed for slaughter. Some defenders fled at the sight of him, others froze. Sigismund moved forward alone. Their clash was nothing like the duels aboard the Conqueror. Those bouts were contests of skill, of pride, of friendly rivalry. This was a collision of absolute opposites. The unbreakable will of Sigismund against the bottomless fury of Khârn. Khârn struck first, swinging with such force that the air howled. Sigismund parried, his arms shuddering from the impact. Sparks burst from the clash of their weapons. The ground split beneath Khârn's feet. They circled each other, blades dripping, breath streaming through broken helms. Khârn taunted him, if the guttural roars that passed for speech could be called taunts. But Sigismund did not respond. He no longer spoke in duels. Purpose needed no words. Khârn struck again, faster than a man of his size should move, forcing Sigismund onto the defensive. Every impact drove shockwaves through Sigismund's bones. The betrayer fought like a storm, never slowing, never hesitating, every blow meant to kill. But precision beats rage, timing beats frenzy, resolve beats madness. Sigismund found the opening. He pivoted, parried low, and drove the black sword upward in a sweeping arc. The blade sheared through Khârn's pauldron, across his chest, and out beneath his arm. Blood sprayed, steaming in the cold air, and Khârn staggered. So Sigismund struck again, and again, and again, without hesitation, without anger, without joy. Khârn collapsed to one knee, staring in disbelief at the warrior who had just carved him apart. Even through the haze of the nails, even through the blood rage, he recognised what had happened. Sigismund had not beaten him with fury, he had beaten him with clarity. For a heartbeat, the two men who had once been brothers looked at one another. Then Sigismund stepped past Khârn as if dismissing a memory. The betrayer fell behind him, broken, bleeding, and silent. The duel spread across the palace like wildfire. Even the custodians took note, if not of the kill, then of the precision. For the Emperor's champion did not revel in victory, he simply moved on to the next threat without pause. And the next threat came swiftly. Fulgrim, the demon Primarch, the Prince of Excess, the serpent of the Emperor's children. Where Khârn was fury, Fulgrim was perfection made monstrous. The battle took place outside the Saturnine Gate, where the marble walls were already cracked under relentless assault. The ground was slick with blood and chemical fire, smoke twisted into the sky, veiling the sun. Sigismund arrived just as Fulgrim descended upon the defenders like a living nightmare. Fulgrim's beauty had been replaced by something grotesque, serpentine limbs, glistening scales, a face warped into a mockery of nobility. His laughter echoed against the walls, a sound that froze mortal soldiers in place. Then his eyes found Sigismund.
Ah,
the demon purred.
The Emperor's pet.
Sigismund raised the black sword, and the duel began. Fulgrim moved like liquid silver, too fast, too graceful, too impossible to track. His blade work was flawless, every motion a symphony of violence. Sigismund blocked what he could, dodged what he could not, and countered whenever openings appeared. But this was a Primarch, a being elevated far above mortals, a above Astartes, even above champions. Fulgrim struck with 6 limbs at once, each blow a killing stroke. Sigismund parried with both hands, each block sending tremors through his arms. The demon's laughter rang in his ears as though mocking the idea that a mere Astartes could challenge him. But Sigismund did not retreat. Not a step. Not a breath. Every strike he returned was aimed with absolute purpose, seeking joints, gaps, weaknesses. He fought with a purity of intent that seemed almost naive against Fulgrim's serpentine malice. And yet, for a moment, he held his own. Even Fulgrim realised it.
"You are wasted on Dawn,"
the demon hissed.
"Serve me, little champion. I will give you eternity."
Sigismund answered with a blow that nearly cut one of Fulgrim's arms clean off. The demon shrieked. Then the tide turned. Fulgrim struck Sigismund with all the contempt of a Primarch denied his prize. A whip-like limb lashed across Sigismund's chest, ripping armour and flesh. A sword of impossible sharpness pierced his shoulder. A claw slammed into his stomach, hurling him across the courtyard and into a ruined column. He could not rise. Fulgrim advanced, ready to finish him. Sigismund tightened the grip of his black sword, knowing he could not win, but refusing to surrender. He lifted the blade in trembling hands, preparing to die on his feet. Then a golden blur slammed into Fulgrim with the force of a collapsing star. It was Rogel Dawn. The wall itself shook. Fulgrim reeled back, hissing, then fled into the chaos with mocking laughter trailing behind him. Sigismund tried to rise again, but Dawn was already kneeling beside him, shield raised, eyes burning with a fury that was not directed at his son, but at the universe itself for placing them in this moment. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Sigismund's survival was answer enough. That was the last time Sigismund would ever cross blades with a Primarch, but it was far from the last duel he would fight in the siege. For the traitor legions were not done yet, and the Emperor's champion still had a destiny to fulfill, one that would demand every ounce of strength he had left. The siege was entering its final hellish stage, and the duels yet to come would shape the very soul of the future Black Templars. When the traitor banners finally fell and the echoes of the siege faded into ash and mourning, the Imperium emerged victorious, but shattered. The palace walls still stood, but little else resembled the galaxy the Emperor had envisioned. Legions were broken, Primarchs were scattered, the Brotherhood of Astartes was poisoned beyond repair. And amid the wreckage stood Sigismund, alive, scarred, but changed. The Emperor's champion had not died during the final battles of Terra, as destiny once hinted he might. Instead, he lived to witness a far different fate, a galaxy grasping for stability, struggling to rebuild from betrayal, and searching for a way to ensure such treachery never happened again. It was in this fragile moment, after the greatest war humanity had ever endured, that Sigismund's path diverged from that of his Primarch, his legion, and even his own past. For the first time since being raised into the Imperial Fists, he faced a future that demanded not only a warrior, but a founder, a father, a figure whose example would echo for millennia. The legions were too large, too powerful, too close to the edge. Guilliman's Codex Astartes sought to break them into chapters, smaller, more manageable forces that could never again rise as unified engines of rebellion. Many chafed under this decree, the Imperial Fists most of all. Dawn resisted until the very last moment. To shatter the 7th Legion, his beloved creation, was akin to tearing his own soul. But Rogel Dawn was not one to place pride before necessity. When the High Lords demanded compliance, he accepted, though with a grief that weighed on every word he spoke. From the fragments of the Legion would come new chapters, each forged to carry the torch of the Imperial Fists into the Age of Rebirth. But one stood apart from the beginning. Sigismund did not hesitate. He understood instinctively that the days of the great unified legions were gone. The 7th could not return to the role it had once held, nor could he. The Emperor's champion had walked too close to vision, purpose, and bloody devotion to simply resume the life of a captain in a divided legion. He approached Dawn with humility, but also with an unshakable steadiness. Sigismund asked to take a chapter into a new crusade, taking the war to those who would threaten the realm, and hunt the traitors who escaped judgment. Dawn studied him for a long time. This was not the impetuous request of a disobedient son. It was the calling of a man shaped by purpose, a warrior forged in the Emperor's light and tempered in the darkest days of the heresy. Dawn saw no pride in Sigismund's eyes, no desire for glory, only conviction. A different kind of prophecy. Dawn agreed, and that sealed the foundation of one of the most zealous fighting forces the galaxy would ever know. The Black Templars were born, not as a simple second founding chapter, but as a continuation of the ideals Sigismund had exemplified during the siege: relentless aggression, unbreakable devotion, and a refusal to ever cease the war for the Emperor's dream. Their heraldry came not from tradition, but from Sigismund himself. Black armour, white trim, a stark contrast to the yellow and red from their progenitors. Where other chapters retain the markings of their legion, the Black Templars embrace the personal symbolism of their founder. The black armour of the Emperor's champion, the white to signify purity of purpose, and the bold cross of the Templars, echoing the oath-bound brotherhood Sigismund had once led in the Imperial Fists. For the first time in Astartes history, a chapter defined its identity not by the gene line of its primarch, but by the spiritual fervour of a single warrior. This was Sigismund's gift to the Imperium, and his burden. Early recruitment reflected this new identity. Sigismund selected warriors from the Imperial Fists who shared his unyielding zeal, those for whom war was not duty alone, but calling. These Astartes were not interested in governance, politics, or strategic grandstanding. They were crusaders, carved entirely from the belief that humanity's enemies must be pursued without hesitation or mercy. Sigismund gave them a home, the Eternal Crusader, a mighty warship that became both fortress monastery and banner for their newfound purpose. Upon its grand deck, beneath vaulting arches bearing the inscription of Terran oaths, Sigismund addressed his chosen warriors for the first time as their High Marshal. His voice carried the solemn weight of a vow.
We do not rest. We do not fortify. We do not wait behind walls. The Emperor did not craft us to defend one world. He made us to reclaim the stars.
And then the oath was spoken. The Eternal Crusade. A vow that would define the Black Templars for the next 10,000 years. To forever carry the Emperor's wrath into the night. To fight without cease. To purge the Imperium's enemies wherever they hid. And to never accept peace so long as even one foe still drew breath. Other chapters pursued threats. The Black Templars hunted them. Sigismund's leadership reflected every lesson he had learned since his childhood on Terra. Discipline shaped by the Imperial Fists. Zeal shaped by his role as the Emperor's champion. Purpose shaped by prophecy, shame, and redemption. Under his command, the Black Templars refused to follow conventional Astartes doctrine. Where others chapters settled into fortress monasteries, they lived aboard ships. Where other chapters maintained librarians, the Templars shunned psykers entirely. Where others cultivated orderly company structures, the Templars gathered in crusade fleets, fluid, adaptable, answering directly to the High Marshal rather than rigid hierarchy. Their most distinctive trait, however, came from a small gesture Sigismund himself had adopted long ago aboard the Conqueror: chains. Where Khârn had once bound his weapon in blood fury, the Black Templars now bound theirs in oath fury. Each chain wrapped around a sword or bolt pistol symbolised the eternal nature of their vows, a reminder that a Templar's weapon was not merely a tool of war, but an extension of the oath he carried. The Templars did not grip their weapons, they shackled themselves to them. Chains of devotion, chains of purpose, chains of war. From the moment they set course away from Terra, the Black Templars were something new in the Imperium, a chapter without a home, without a respite, without a limit to its ambition. Sigismund led them personally, directing crusade after crusade across the surviving pockets of heresy and rebellion. He hunted the remnants of the traitor legions with meticulous fury. He shattered orc empires that threatened the supply routes of a recovering Imperium. He broke human warlords who still clung to independence. He even clashed with the Xenos species newly emboldened by the Imperium's weakened state. Wherever the Black Templars went, victory followed, but so did whispers. Some thought Sigismund sought death, others believe he sought purpose. The truth was neither, or both. Sigismund was not running from the past, he was fulfilling it. The prophecy, the shame, the siege, the oath, the black armour, the fire within him that could never, ever rest. He had been many things in his life: Templar, captain, champion, son, weapon. But in the founding of the Black Templars, Sigismund became something greater than himself. He became legacy. A legacy the galaxy would feel for millennia. A legacy that would outlive even him. But Sigismund, for all his strength and purpose, was still mortal. And in the centuries to come, another destiny waited for him. One final duel that would define not only his life, but his death. For the greatest enemy of mankind had not forgotten him, and the first captain of the Imperial Fists would one day cross blades again, not with brother or traitor, but with Abaddon the Despoiler himself. The founding of the Black Templars did not signal a new beginning for Sigismund. It signalled the continuation of a purpose that had been burning within him since the walls of the Imperial Palace trembled beneath the guns of traitors. The Imperium celebrated its fragile survival, its rebirth, its reconstruction. But for Sigismund, survival was not victory. Reconstruction was not justice. Peace was not an option. War still called to him, not as a hunger, but as a burden, as destiny. The Black Templars had been founded to answer that destiny, and the very moment their warship Eternal Crusade cleared Terra's orbit, Sigismund made it clear that this chapter would never rest. They would not inherit fortresses or govern sectors. They would not stand watch over borders or be summoned by bureaucrats. They had been created for one purpose alone: to continue the war the Emperor could no longer wage. The war against heresy. The war against treachery. The war against every threat that dared challenge humanity's future. This was the Eternal Crusade, and Sigismund would lead it until his final breath. From its command pulpit, the Eternal Crusader was both a cathedral and a war engine. Its vaulted chambers echoed with rites of battle. Its shrine altar held relics of the Imperial Fists and new oaths sworn by Templar initiates. Its decks were lined with honour scripts carved by Sigismund's own hand, declaring vows that would bind the chapter for generations. Upon that deck, before the assembled warriors of the newborn chapter, Sigismund spoke words that would become the Templars' creed. He drew the black sword, not as Emperor's champion, but as High Marshal, and held it aloft. The Templars answered with a thunderous roar, their voices echoing across the halls like storm winds pounding cathedral walls. And with that vow sealed, Sigismund pointed toward the stars. There would be no homeworld, no garrison, only the long, unending hunt. The early years of the Eternal Crusade became a whirlwind of operations that left the Black Templars half legend, half phantom in the eyes of Imperial commanders. No sooner had news of a rising warlord, orc incursion, or traitor remnant reached their segmental authorities than the Templars would already be burning through the region like a wildfire of ceramite and flame. They struck at the Iron Warriors' scattered warbands, driving them into the void with an almost personal fury. Sigismund had not forgotten what those sons of Percha Robbo had done. They dismantled the remains of the Night Lord's packs wandering the post-heresy route, each encounter reminding Sigismund of the dishonour he witnessed on Sherut. Every Night Lord slain felt like a wound closed, a lesson avenged. Yet Sigismund never killed with spite, he killed with purpose. They crushed orc kingdoms that had risen amid the Imperium's weakness, tearing down war bosses who mistook humanity's exhaustion for vulnerability. For every fortress world the orcs thought secure, the Templars arrived as a hammer shattering false pride. They hunted rogue psykers with a zeal unmatched even among the more puritanical chapters. Where others hesitated, Sigismund did not. Memory of Terra's demonic horror still burned behind his eyes. To every battlefield he brought the same iron conviction. The enemy must be confronted, not contained. Destroyed, not delayed. Where other chapters measured war in campaigns, Sigismund measured it in oaths fulfilled. Yet what truly distinguished the Black Templars from their brother chapters was not their fury, but their structure, or more truthfully, the lack of one. The Codex Astartes insisted upon 10 companies. Sigismund insisted upon crusades. Each one a flexible, ever-changing force assembled around a core of veterans and marshals. Each fleet could wage planetary war, shipboard assault, or surgical strikes without waiting for central approval. Some chapters whispered that Sigismund defied Guilliman's reforms. Sigismund answered those whispers only with continued victory. In his eyes, obedience to the Emperor did not mean following rules forged in peacetime. It meant following purpose, and his purpose was the one he had carried since childhood: protect the innocent, punish the wicked, stand where others fall, and swing the blade when others hesitate. The Eternal Crusade was not only a campaign, it became a culture, and Sigismund shaped it with deliberate, unrelenting care. He demanded rituals that turned every weapon into a sacred bond. The chains that wrapped around bolters and swords were not there for theatrics but as visible promises, reminders that a Templar fought not for himself, but for the Emperor. Breaking those vows meant unmaking who they were. he instituted the Trials of Fellowship, where neophytes were placed under the tutelage of experienced crusaders, learning through hardship the meaning of faith and duty. He forbade the presence of librarians within the chapter, not out of blind dogma, but because he had seen firsthand how easily cycles became gateways for corruption. The Templars would meet witchcraft with steel, not sorcery. And he nurtured in them a hunger, not for glory, but for the righteous pursuit of enemies who evaded justice. Every initiate learned the same lesson. You are a sword. You are not a shield. You are not a servant of peace. You are the executioner of the Emperor's will. Years became decades, decades became centuries, and Sigismund remained at the front of every crusade, still wielding the black sword, still wearing the same armour he'd worn on Terra, repaired countless times but never replaced. His hair whitened, his features aged, but his fury did not diminish. Astartes lived long lives, but even among them, Sigismund endured as if driven by something beyond mortal strength. Some whispered that the Emperor preserved him. Others murmured that the prophecy had taken root in him, slowing his death until his duty was complete. But the truth was simpler. Purpose kept him alive. He would not die until the final oath was fulfilled. And so he fought on, through warp storms and demon incursions, through rogue legions and Xenos empires, through every threat that dared test the Imperium. He was no longer the Emperor's champion. He was the Emperor's vengeance. But vengeance is a path that always leads somewhere, and Sigismund's path, though long, had an end. Because deep within the Eye of Terror, a new power was rising. A commander of the Black Legion. A warlord who gathered the fragments of the traitor sons and forged them into a weapon meant to finish what the War Master began. Abaddon the Despoiler. And across the gulf of centuries, Abaddon had not forgotten Sigismund. The day would come, and soon, when these two warriors would stand face to face on the deck of a burning vessel, both carrying the weight of legions on their shoulders. The Eternal Crusade had forged Sigismund into a legend, but the final chapter of that legend would be written in the fires of the First Black Crusade. Across centuries of unending war, Sigismund became many things: High Marshal, Crusade Master, Executioner of Heresy, the Black Blade of the Emperor's lingering wrath. But to the traitors of the War Master, scattered across a broken galaxy, he became something far more persistent. A shadow, a hunter, a reminder that the Imperium had not forgotten. And though Sigismund never said the name aloud, not in prayer, not in rage, not in exhaustion, he carried one final enemy like a splinter lodged in the soul. An enemy he knew he would face one day. Abaddon, first captain of the Sons of Horus, heir to the War Master's fury. The one who had walked from the ashes of the siege with a hatred of the Imperium so absolute it burned brighter than the Eye of Terror itself. Their destinies had been bending toward each other for centuries, and in the dawn of the 41st millennium, the gulf between hunter and hunted finally closed. No chronicler can fully describe the rage that burned within Abaddon following Horus's death. To him, the War Master had been murdered not by the Emperor, but by weakness. Weakness in Horus, weakness in the traitor legions, weakness in the galaxy that refused to collapse under the fires of betrayal. And so Abaddon made a promise. He would succeed where Horus failed. His Black Legion, forged from the ashes of the Sons of Horus and countless renegades, became the weapon that would carve a path back into the heart of the Imperium. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. The First Black Crusade began like a storm breaking across the Khârn Gate. Warp tides churned, demons flooded reality. Black Legion warships poured from the Eye of Terror like a river of fire. World after world fell screaming. Across the Imperium, the High Lords scrambled for order. But where their council fractured under panic, one warrior did not. Word travelled through the astropathic channels, through crusade fleets, through the whispered networks of Templar chaplains. Abaddon had risen. And when Sigismund heard it, he did not hesitate. He gathered the nearest crusade elements. Sword brethren hardened by decades of war, initiates bound by oath and chain, and a fleet ready to die without question. Their course was set instantly. Toward Cadia, toward Abaddon, toward the final jewel destiny had been sharpening for 1,000 years. The battle that awaited them was not a war in the traditional sense, it was a cataclysm. A tempest of broken fleets, flaming wreckage, demon incursions, and void combat so brutal that the space above Cadia glowed red like a wound of a dying star. The Eternal Crusader cut its way through the Black Legion vessels in a straight line, ramming any ship too slow to evade, burning others down to molten slag. Sigismund stood at the command throne, watching each tactical display with cold, iron focus. This was not another crusade. This was personal. He had fought traitors his entire life, purged them, hunted them, scattered them. But Abaddon was the heart of the rot, the successor to the greatest betrayal in human history, the creature that carried the mantle of the War Master like a desecrated crown. If Sigismund could kill him, if he could cut short Abaddon's war before it truly began, then the galaxy might know peace for the first time since the Siege of Terra. Fate, of course, had other plans. As the Eternal Crusader drove toward the core of the Chaos Fleet, a massive assault barge of the Black Legion rammed its hull with titanic force, tearing a hole through the Templars' outer decks. Boarding torpedoes followed like a swarm of steel locusts. Traitor Astartes poured onto the ship in waves of black armour and roaring demonic iconography. And at their head, surrounded by his chosen, stood Ezekiel Abaddon, clad in Terminator plate blacker than midnight, bearing the demon sword Drachnien, a blade that whispered and shrieked in a dozen voices, and mounted on his arm, the talon of Horus itself, still stained with blood from the Siege of Terra. Sigismund rose from the throne. He said nothing. He did not summon reinforcements or broadcast challenges. He simply drew the black sword and strode forward. This was not a battle. This was judgment. The clash that erupted on the Eternal Crusader's primary deck was apocalyptic. Templars and Black Legionaries tore into each other with the fury of centuries. Chainswords screamed, bolters thundered, bolts of warp energy tore through marble pillars, chaplains bellowed oaths, traitor champions shrieked praises to dark gods. But the battle was merely a backdrop. Everyone knew the truth. This deck was a stage. And at its centre, two titans were drawing closer with every passing second. When Sigismund finally stepped onto the deck, trailing broken traitors behind him, Abaddon turned. Their eyes met across the battlefield. Brother against brother. Past against present. Duty against hatred. Their duel was brutal beyond measure. Sigismund moved with the precision of millennia of discipline, each blow an execution, each parry the work of a master. Abaddon moved with raw, terrifying power, guided not only by his towering physique, but by the warp itself whispering through Drachnien. The black sword met demon blade, sending ripples of black and gold energy through the air. Sparks flew, deck plates buckled, warriors on both sides backed away from the shockwaves. Each strike carried history, each counter carried prophecy. Abaddon was younger, stronger, augmented by the blessings of the ruinous powers. Sigismund was older, slower, carrying wounds no apothecary could repair. But age had not dimmed his fury. If anything, it made him burn hotter. He fought like a man who had spent 1,000 years preparing for this one moment. A man who had earned every breath, every stance, every motion for the day he would meet the greatest traitor of the age. And for a moment, just a moment, Sigismund gained the advantage. He fainted low. Abaddon bit. The High Marshal pivoted, stepping into the opening, and drove the black sword deep into the despoiler's chest. Abaddon staggered, and the galaxy held its breath. Sigismund had won. He had done what no loyalist had accomplished since the fall of Horus. But victory demands more than one perfect strike. It demands a warrior who still has the strength to follow through. Sigismund no longer did. In driving the blade home, he had opened himself up completely. His guard shattered, his footing lost, and Abaddon, even wounded, was still a juggernaut. The talon of Horus struck. It tore through Sigismund's armour. It tore through bone. It tore through everything that stood between Sigismund and death. The High Marshal was split at the waist, thrown backward in a cascade of blood and shattered ceramite. But he did not scream. He didn't falter. He dragged himself upright, propping his broken body on the black sword he could no longer lift. Abaddon approached, victorious yet wary. Sigismund looked up at him, not with fear, nor with regret, only with contempt. And with his dying breath, he delivered the words that would haunt Abaddon for the rest of his wretched existence.
You will die as your weakling father died, soulless, honourless, weeping, ashamed.
Abaddon's snarl shook with something dangerously close to fear. Then Sigismund, last of the Emperor's champions of the heresy, slumped forward and died. His crusade was ended, his vow was complete. And in that final moment, the hunter became legend, and the hunted became burdened with a curse he would never outrun. But Sigismund's story was not quite finished, for even in death he would shape the Imperium. And Abaddon, stung by the truth of the High Marshal's final words, would make a decision that changed the future of the Black Templars forever. When Sigismund's body finally went still on the blood-slicked deck of the Eternal Crusader, the battle did not end. The Black Legion surged forward to finish the slaughter. The Black Templars, roaring oaths in voices cracked with grief and fury, hurled themselves over their fallen High Marshal to shield him with their own bodies. The deck became a single, heaving mass of violence, chainswords hacking, bolters screaming, armour cracking beneath the boots of clashing giants. But in the centre of that chaos, Sigismund lay in perfect stillness. A warrior whose entire life had been defined by motion, by relentless purpose, by ceaseless crusade, now motionless at last. Yet the stillness was deceptive. Something had shifted in the battle the moment he fell, like a torch extinguished in a storm. Both loyalist and traitor felt it. Even Abaddon paused, breath ragged, blood seeping from the wound Sigismund had carved into him. He stared down not in triumph but in something more complex. Something resembling anger, but also a twisted recognition. He had not merely killed a foe, he had slain the last echo of Horus's greatest rival. And in Sigismund's dying curse, those final brutal words that cut deeper than any blade, the despoiler felt the shadow of judgment, not from the Emperor, but from Sigismund himself. A mirror held up to the son of Horus, reflecting not destiny, but failure. It stung enough that Abaddon made a decision few expected. He ordered Sigismund's body preserved. Not desecrated, not displayed, preserved. And then he commanded it be sent to Terra as a message, a declaration of war, a promise carved in death, and a reminder that the age of crusades was not over. Not for him, not for the Imperium, not for anyone. You have received the transmission of Dominissimo Voxlor. The Eternal Crusade does not fade. Sigismund's oath still burns, across 1,000 battlefronts, across the hearts of every Templar who binds their weapon in his name. Mark your allegiance, strike the seal of subscription, and join the Crusaders who refuse to falter, refuse to kneel, refuse to let the Emperor's blade grow dull. Until the next broadcast, keep your vows unbroken, your faith unshaken, and your sword forever drawn.